on Arts 24. As a teenager in the 60s, he was told there was no such thing as a black photographer. Today, the work of Dennis Morris includes some of the most iconic music portraits of our time.
This is one of my most iconic shots. I got into the van, Bob was in the front seat, and I was sitting there, and he turned around and said to me, "You ready, Dennis?" I went, "Yes." Wow. And the adventure began.
That adventure led to portraits of Bob Marley and later the Sex Pistols that have defined music history. Now his full collection is on display in the Music and Life exhibition at the Met in Paris. Dennis tells us how it all began as a teenager bunking off school to meet his hero.
He was coming over to do his first tour. And so I decided not to go to school that day. And I was in my last year at school. And so I went to the club called the Speakeasy Club in Margaret Street in West End. And I got there like 10 o'clock and didn't realize that bands don't do sound check at 10 o'clock in the morning. So I waited and waited. I think about 3 or 4 o'clock he turned up and he walked up to the club and I said, "Hey, can I take a picture?" He said, "Yeah, man, come in." And so I went in with him and while they were doing their sound check, they had break. He was asking what it was like to be a young black kid in England, and I was asking him what Jamaica was like. And he really took to me, told me about the tour and asked me if I'd like to come along, and I said yes.
You said that Bob Marley taught you a lot. What would you say was the biggest lesson he taught you?
Biggest lesson he told me was to believe in myself. There will be many, many obstacles, but just keep believing in yourself and keep pushing. But he also gave me a sense of me, a sense of belonging. A sense of knowing my history, knowing, that we as a people did many great things. Because at school, in those days, you were never taught anything about black history. But he told me, about Marcus Garvey, Paul Bogle, all these people, Haile Selassie, Ethiopia. And he really gave me that feeling of like, oh, wow, I never really, realized that we did so many things and what was possible. And through that, I was able to pursue my dream.
A few years after his fateful meeting with Bob Marley, in 1977, at the height of punk, Sid Vicious invited Morris to become the official photographer for the Sex Pistols, capturing their chaotic UK tour during the cultural upheaval of the time. What was it like being with them in their heyday?
Absolute chaos. But the thing is, I never actually set out to be a rock photographer. My ambition was to be a war photographer. So when I worked with the Sex Pistols, I found my war, because in those days with the Sex Pistols, it was absolute chaos, because there were a lot of royalists who really didn't like the fact that they were anti-royalists in that sense, from the songs and the things that they did on television or in interviews.
And the trashed hotel rooms.
The trash hotels room and, et cetera, et cetera. And then with Bob also, Bob was the rebellious voice of the young youth of Jamaica. And so working with the Pistols and working with Bob, I found my war, because basically, as I said, with Bob, when I went to Jamaica to do, it was really, really quite violent and very dangerous. And with the Sex Pistols at the gigs, it was absolute mayhem, absolute mayhem. And so I found my war. To get the shots I got, I would be in the crowd, but to get those great shots, and to make them not blurred, I would be pogoing with the fans. And by doing that, I got the shots. I got some amazing shots, and by also doing that, I proved myself to the band as well. For them, if you're there with us, you know what it's like, and that's how he was able to get those incredible pictures.
While Morris is known for his iconic music portraits, his work documenting black British life in London is just as powerful. Part of the Windrush generation, he immigrated from Jamaica in the early 60s and began photographing his community as a teenager, capturing the pride and dignity of black British culture.
These images, what you have in these images, like some of it, you can see some of the living conditions, like for instance, in this particular shot here, in a house with a family, there would be maybe 3 rooms on each floor, and in each room would be a family. But one thing about it, when you look at this man, very, very, very sharp, because no matter how the conditions were, we always looked sharp. We always had that. So it's called dignity and pride.
You were only 11 when one of your photographs was printed in the British newspaper, the Daily Mirror. Tell us the story.
I was obsessed with photography. And so my mentor, Mr. Patterson, always encouraged me to go out with my camera and looking at the work of people like Cartier Bresson. So every Sunday after church, I would take off my uniform and pick up my camera and then go to Hyde Park, because that's where every amateur photographer would go. And so on that particular Sunday, there was a big demonstration in Hyde Park. And so I think I had like 2 rolls of film, and I thought I had something. So I went to Fleet Street.
On your own, as an 11-year-old?
Yeah. And so I walked into, it was an agency called UPI. And I walked in there and I said, I was at the Hyde Park at a demonstration. So they developed the film, and when they looked at it, it just so happened I had a picture of a person that was part of the PLO movement with a little boy on his shoulder. And they paid me £16 for it. And I thought, wow, £16 for a photograph. Yeah, you could really make a living from photography.
From a young age, you were known as Mad Dennis, where you lived in East London. How did your love of photography set you apart from other people?
That obsession really set me apart from my friends, you know, where they were into playing football or whatever it may be. I was never that interested in football in that way. I just wanted to take pictures. But what I did do was I was always taking pictures of my surroundings in that way. So I built up quite a big collection of images of friends and people within my community. I was actually quite a shy boy as such. But when I had a camera in my hand, I felt like I was, you know, Superman, because it was something I knew I was completely in control of, and none of my friends could do that.
And lots of those photos are in this exhibition, where we see Black Britain in the 70s.
Yeah.
It was a very pivotal moment, you've said. Tell us why.
Well, England was going through a lot of change. England brought over a lot of West Indians from the Caribbean to basically rebuild England after the war. But the problem was, at the time, no one really understood how we were as a people. And so it created a lot of problems in many, many ways. Later on, you had things such as Margaret Thatcher. She brought in a thing called a sus law, which meant that if you were as a black person, just by standing on the street, you could be arrested because you may be thinking of committing a crime. And hundreds of black kids got put into prison just for standing on the street. And so it was a very, very tough time, but at the same time, people were also realizing that we did have something to contribute to the society. And so things started to open up slowly, but surely, you know, it did. And for me, it was a time of learning. And one of the things for me was, for instance, when I left school, I would ring up magazines or wherever it may be for a job. And I'd tell them my name, Dennis Morris. And then when I turned up, oh, it's gone. Because by my name, they didn't know that I was black. And so all these barriers were always there. But as I said, what I kept doing, I just kept going. You know, and that's what you have to do. You just have to just keep going, just keep pushing through those barriers, you know, and eventually the doors will open.
Is it true that a careers advisor actually told you there's no such thing as a black photographer?
Yeah, when I was leaving school, I had a meeting with my career advisor, and he said, so what do you want to do, Morris? And I said, I want to be a photographer. And he said, don't be stupid, there's no such thing as a black photographer. And I said, yes, there is. There's Gordon Parks, there's Jane Fantasy. And they're like, who?
A true visionary, Morris was determined to take his photos. He also reshaped how musicians were marketed, with his influence spanning reggae, punk, and Britpop. His career includes portraits of everyone from the Stone Roses and Oasis to Patti Smith and Marianne Faithfull, reimagining the visual landscape of music. Marianne Faithfull passed away in January.
Yeah.
What was it like working with her?
It was a beautiful experience. What happened there with Marianne was I just joined Island Records as an art director. And they had just signed her, and they knew they had a great album. They had worked with people like David Bailey, Clive Arrowsmith, all the great top British fashion photographers, but no one got the shot. And so I kept saying, you know, I could do this. And they were like, oh, you know, you just joined the company. I said, no, I can do it. So eventually they never, you know, they said, okay, have a try. She arrived at the studio, and then as she walked in, she said to me, do you know who I am? I said, of course I do. She said, well, you know, this would be the making of you. And, you know, I said, yeah, I know. And then she put her things down. She said, well, I must have a drink. I said, okay, fine. So we left the studio and we walked to a pub nearby. We had a few drinks, and then she said she was hungry, and then we left the pub. We went to a restaurant. She ordered tons of food, didn't touch the food, and just overturned the table and said, don't pay, the food's terrible. I paid, and then we left the restaurant, went back to the studio. She then went into the change room, and she changed, and she came out, and she was glowing. I knew what went on. And so for me to get any of these pictures, you know, I had to get into the world of my subject. And so with Marion, we just got absolutely blind drunk. There was one point, she was on the floor, and I was standing over a bit like the scene from Blow Up, and I'm like taking shots of her. And then she got up and sat back on the sofa, and then she went with a cigarette and click, and I knew I got the shot. It became one of my most iconic images. She had a sense of freedom, which I'd never witnessed in a woman in that way, in that sense, and a sense of self. And she had been through a lot. You know, she was at the very top, and at one point she lost everything, and she was homeless, and then she came back, and she was a real survivor.
You said you wanted to be a war reporter. When you look at all of these photos in this incredible exhibition, what do you make of your journey?
When I look at all these things, it just made me realize that what's the most incredible thing? The fact that I'm still alive. I can't believe I'm still here, because it was such a dangerous time, you know, such a lot of excess in many, many ways. I will say I never really thought of it being as big as it is, as such. I just wanted to take pictures, but I never had a thought, well, I'm going to be a multimillionaire, or people will know my work or my name worldwide. The things that come, you can't believe it sometimes.
Dennis Morris, thank you so much.
Thank you, Eve. Thank you. Pleasure talking to you.